Welcome everyone to the launch event, online launch event of the report that we worked out last year in Cyprus on working in fragile contexts on the cultural relations and how we can work together with different stakeholders. I will just tell you a little on the good Zoom practices. So you are all muted. It's just to keep you this. We also ask you to put a video on so that we can see you and interact. We will try to have this session as interactive as possible. There's a chat option where you could write about who you are, as well as use it for questions or reactions. There's also a button at the bottom of the Zoom page for the non-verbal reactions, so you can use those as well. This webinar will be recorded so that we don't lose any of the important information. And we will also send you all the documents that we're talking about during the webinar after the webinar. But most of you must have received the report itself already, and also put it shortly in the chat. So we'll have an hour and a half to spend together. We're also gonna have some more information about the report and who we are, as well as where we will have a panel discussion on the recommendations that come out of the report. So we hope we're gonna have an entertaining 1 hour and a half, and I'll pass the floor now to Gita to tell us more.
Welcome everyone, also from my side. My name is Gita Czoch. I'm the director of EUNIC. So we'll have a bit of an introduction to the topic of today. Then we'll join into a debate with colleagues who were at the workshop. 4 colleagues from different institutions are in the room with us. And then we have a Q&A session. So Rosanna Lewis and Lina Kyrgios-Ovaite will facilitate the Q&A session. So feel free also during the interventions to put remarks and questions in the chat box. But at the end of this meeting, there is also time for exchange. Just maybe a bit to give the broader framework of our work. As the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting us all globally in many ways, we at EUNIC believe that culture, creativity, and cultural relations can be at the heart of the solution to remain connected, resilient, and in good mental health. In November last year, we gathered together with colleagues in Nicosia, Cyprus, to exchange on collaboration, European collaboration in fragile context. And the report, which we are launching today, comes timely, as there is a lot to learn from the projects and case studies presented here. What do we mean when we say fragile contexts? We have actually used a very precise definition. It's in the report, and it's the one used by the OECD, which says that a fragile context is a region or state which has weak capacities to carry out basic governance functions and lacks the ability to develop mutually constructive relations with society. But fragile can mean much more than that. Fragile can also refer to environmental fragility or to economic and humanitarian crisis. So I think for the sake of the discussion today, we can use also the broader sense of the word, especially as now we are all in a fragile situation caused by a very minuscule virus. What's important is that we can apply the lessons drawn from sharing the different experiences in fragile contexts, not only to our work in such fragile contexts, but to the global challenges we are facing today. The lessons learned can be summarized into 2 short phrases. One is that we are stronger when we work together. I think this is at the core of EUNIC's work always. And that we do not to be physically in the same place in order to have impact and join efforts. And it's interesting that we've had this workshop in November, where we found out that working remotely also works and might be especially efficient for situations like those that we talked about. And it seems almost ironic that now we're in this situation and that we've learned this on a global scale, that it's working. And I think these learnings that we've all went through during COVID-19, that are still going through, and I think this webinar is also an expression of this, will hopefully help us to to join forces, not only in these countries or contexts that we're talking about today, but on a general level as well. The report includes recommendations to the EU institutions, to the EU delegations, to EUNIC Global, the office here in Brussels that coordinates the work of the EUNIC members, and to EUNIC members themselves. And we will talk about what we think are the most important recommendations later today. So culture, after all, is key to bringing people together, creating trust and understanding, and a more peaceful world. This is the motto, or this is the vision that lies at the heart of our work, of our collaborative work in European collaboration. And I think this can be also the motto of our discussions today. Let us revisit in this online launch event some of the case studies that we've had from Afghanistan to Yemen, share our perceptions of joining efforts globally to grow and heal together in fragile contexts, but not only there. So I wish us a very productive discussion and sharing session. And with that, I hand over to Isabel van der Juchte from the British Council. British Council co-hosted this workshop together with us at EUNIC.
Thank you, Gitte. And thank you everybody for joining the seminar today. Yeah, I mean, it was very important for the British Council to organize this knowledge sharing workshop with EUNIC, because it did follow up on a research which we commissioned, looking at the evidence for the contribution of the arts to security and stability for countries in states of fragility, conflict, and transition. The Arts of Peace research was done with the University of West Scotland. The research stresses that the value of arts and culture to advance peace and security has been traditionally considered by academics and policymakers as limited. Yet, the experience of culture operators, like the members of EUNIC, working in areas of conflict and fragility, reveals significant evidence of the power of arts and culture to increase the resilience of communities and provide a platform for dialogue during time of crisis. The EUNIC knowledge sharing workshop on working in fragile contexts was an opportunity to discuss with Professor Gill Mcpherson from University of Scotland, who is here with us today, but also with EUNIC members and EU delegations, the challenges of working in fragile contexts and how obstacles can be overcome through a culture relations approach. Participants had the opportunity to showcase examples where culture programs have made an important contribution to conflict prevention and reconciliation, and also explore areas of cooperation. The workshop participants included representatives from the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Goethe Institute, IFA, which is the German Institute for Foreign Relations, ICID, the Agency for Development Cooperation, EU Delegations, Iraq and Yemen, and the British Council. The participants presented 13 case studies dealing with international cultural relations and cooperation at different stages of conflict, ranging from violence prevention to peace building and post-conflict resolution, and this in 9 countries: Afghanistan, Colombia, Iraq, Libya, occupied Palestinian territories, Turkey, Mali, Syria, and Yemen. All these case studies, you can read all of these case studies in the report. So what is interesting is the case studies discuss different kinds of operating models. Working remotely from neighborhood countries or headquarters, like the action in Syria, which is often done from Lebanon, or the case of the culture French cultural activity in Afghanistan, which is primarily led from Paris, working in the country, but under heavy security constraints, like in Iraq for the Goethe Institute, Institut Français and British Council, mixed work setting, when operators work remotely, but also within country with local teams or small offices, or some program like the Martin Roth Initiative, addressing the work in those countries by enabling temporary relocation for artists and cultural operators to safe spaces. But all in all participants seek to promote the value of culture in this context and operate in similar areas. However, cooperation can be limited due to security constraints or limited presence on the ground. Based on this discussion, the participants of the workshop have identified some key learnings and recommendations, which we will discuss now. So now I pass on to my colleague Rosanna and then to Lina to launch the discussion on the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabelle, and thank you, Gita, Lina, and everyone here with us today. So as mentioned, the report includes recommendations to the EU institutions, to EU delegations, and EUNIC Global, as well as its members. And these recommendations were gathered throughout the workshop, where we did sessions with those who were participating. And there was particular emphasis around exchange between these institutions and learning from each other to strengthen both policy and practice. And this includes cross-sectoral collaboration, so not just in the field of culture and development, but also looking at peace, security and stability, education, and humanitarian aid, as well as development and international cooperation. Several existing mechanisms were also mentioned to improve working relationships, such as the EU-UNIC administrative arrangement for joint working, the implementation of the Culture for the Future manifesto that was drafted last summer, and several funding programs, including UNIC Cluster Fund and the European Houses of Culture. So these recommendations are not only focusing on those EU institutions and modus operandi, but also ensuring co-creation with local partners, that these kinds of initiatives need to be long-term, need to have models that are adaptable, flexible to the local context, and receive dedicated sources of funding. So to the EU institutions, one of the specific recommendations was to enable EU delegations to work more closely with UNIC members in a framework of close cooperation, especially in cultural cooperation programs and projects. For the EU delegations, there was more of a need to raise awareness of the role of culture with the political, humanitarian, and cooperation sections, and in particular to broaden the network of potential partners to include local NGOs, CSOs, research bodies, as well as encourage coordination between UNIC members and UNESCO. And then for UNIC members, there was more encouragement to form clusters, to exchange experience and communicate with each other more regularly at a local level. We also discussed setting up remote clusters, potentially for Yemen, Libya, and Syria, with support from the EU delegations. So on that note, I would now like to introduce the panel that we have with us of people who took part in this workshop. We have Professor Gill Mcpherson, Director of the Centre for Culture, Sport and Events at the University of the West of Scotland, Ricardo Villa, Deputy Head of Mission and Head of the Political Press and Information Section of the Delegation of the European Union to Yemen, Olivier Hunvan, Councillor for Development, Bilateral Cooperation and Cultural Affairs for Afghanistan, French Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs, and Stephanie Twigg, Arts Manager, Syria of the British Council. There will be time for questions at the end, so please do add those in the chat throughout the discussion, specifying if you'd like to ask a particular question to one of our speakers, and you'll be able to raise your hand as well if you'd like to make an intervention. So I'd now like to invite the speakers to share their reflections on the knowledge sharing workshop, on the recommendations and the report. I will first be going to Gill. So Gill, I'd like to ask you, based on your academic experience and your understanding of EUNIC after the workshop, could you share some reflections on how theory could be applied in practice and what you see as the key elements that you would consider essential when working in fragile contexts?
Okay, thanks very much, Rosanna, for that introduction, and to everybody else joining us today online and to the other speakers. As Rosanna said, we had a fantastic couple of days with EUNIC looking at a lot of these issues, and the British Council had commissioned ourselves to do a piece of work on the contribution of culture in a fragile context, and from that Alison Bailey of the British Council had produced the work with us on called Arts as Peace report, which I'm sure you can access. So I'd like to say thanks for the insight from the conference and the knowledge sharing workshop, and for the report. I think the report's an excellent report that brings together the value of the discussions that we had over the 2 days, and that I was able to give little bits of insight but learn from you guys as well. And I think some of the key areas that's coming through in that is around that notion of a theory of change, and we hear that being used a lot more throughout Europe as what is a theory of change, and how I would describe that in layperson's terms is it's a roadmap. This is a roadmap of where you want to go, and at certain points there's junctions, and you can come off of those junctions or you can take a different path, and that roadmap, if it's signposted correctly, will take you to where you want to go. So there's the crucial part, is if you are planning a project, if you're working with EUNIC, if you're working with the EU institutions and policymakers, where are the signposts and the paths that you want to travel on? What's the journey that you're taking people with you? And so any theory of change is only going to work if you have clear objectives, clear outputs and outcomes that you chart at the beginning. So if those are in relation to the SDG development goals for peace and justice and sustainability, are they in as part of your theory of change at the start? If they are for the development of resilience and mutuality, how are you planning those? And how are you evaluating them? So some of the key aspects are, for me, and for the work that I've done and witnessed with others and from this report, is about they have to be locally led. And the key part of what the British Council and EUNIC, as far as I can see as well, and other members, is about that cultural relations approach. They have to be community involvement in both the production and the role of art and culture and the development and cooperation, but locally led. They're the experts on the ground, and unless we hear from them as to how things can be better and we take that grassroots approach, nothing will change, because we'll constantly be having the top-down policy-driven approach. So the grassroots has to inform the policy. One slight issue is that in the report we talk about, it talks about for the EUNIC institutions as a recommendation, I think, about that we look to find ways that we can have a homogenous approach to policy and practice. And I would sort of urge that you don't have that homogenous approach to policy and practice. I think there's certain things that we can have an homogenous approach to, and I'm going to touch on them, which is, I think, is about evaluation and impact and how you chart that. And I would like you to see us doing that in a similar way and creating a toolkit. And that came out from the knowledge sharing workshop as well. I think there's key things you can learn, and you can upscale, and you can use these in different ways. But the tricky thing with that is each area, like what works in Syria of storytelling and theatre for engagement in culture and to develop resilience, won't work in Colombia, where they use music, and won't work in Rwanda, the work that we did there, where they use theatre and performance. So the context of the country is really important, and the context is what you'll get from the EUNIC members and the clusters, and they can help inform the institutions and the policymakers. So I hope, I don't know if I'm making that clear, but that's how your theory of change will work. It's about having a model for how you, what I call a logic model of what the change is. And yes, we can create a toolkit within that, but then the local context becomes really individual to each of those countries, and that's what will make it work there. I would like you to think about the development of a symbolic skills that Rosanna and I talk about, these soft skills of resilience building, mutual understanding, trust. If you look at the street art projects that were done in Syria with kids, that were actually able to take kids and allow them to earn money from themselves by developing and working with artists and producing their own art, and then being able to provide for their families. This was about building relations and building mutuality and building trust with them, that then led to longer term goals, that then led to them being able to get back into education. So to sort of sum up, because I know I only have a few minutes, I am heartened to see that we're looking at some similarities in the report and differences in the outcomes of projects, and just trying to get you to think about the range of interventions that you make in culture to reduce the risk to global security and stability. The key people that are doing that are the CSOs and non-state actors. We do need state involvement as well. Like in Rwanda, for example, the work that Never Again Rwanda do, say they can only really do that because of state involvement as well. So it's not an either or approach, it's both, and it's whatever works for that one area. An example of like Create Syria might be as a multi-dimensional, may offer an exemplar for others as to how they work with refugees and get people to talk and design their activities and propose solutions to problems. So there has to be an outcome. And then just to sum up on that point I was trying to make about evaluation and impact, many of the people that we worked with through this report talked about we're actors or we're artists or we're local community. We know what we do is right. Instinctively, we know it makes a difference to people's lives, and we know. And so this is a chance to not just be post-conflict resolution, but actually conflict prevention. And so the thing that you need is to, perhaps in a toolkit as well, is to train people in some of those symbolic skills, how you train them in helping people to evaluate the impact of what they're doing. And some of that evaluation of impact isn't number crunching necessarily. It's a qualitative means of recording, it's mapping, it's tracking change over a period of time. And again, a response back to the unique institutions and policymakers would be that when you're trying to track this work, it takes a bit longer than just other cultural interventions when we can say, look, we put on a performance. Some of the symbolic skills, you might be looking at kids or adults over a 5-year period. You might be going back to them in 10 years' time saying, look at their journey, look at what they've achieved now. So just to bear in mind that the impact and evaluation that we need to understand is that we understand it in different contexts and we understand it longitudinally. And so we need to give artists and policymakers as well, policymakers training in cultural diplomacy or skills and training in how you chart impact over a period of time, because it might not be just that we had 50 people go through this program, but that actually we chart the changes in those people's lives, that we chart, did they get into education? Have they been able to provide for their family? Are they not following in the same footsteps as their grandparents? The nuance of what the change in their lives would be. So longer term approach, tying into the SDG goals and Agenda 2030, and understanding that whilst we are looking to upscale projects and we are looking to upscale toolkits, it's with a nuance of individual context and that cultural relations approach that you all do so well. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Gail. That's really useful. And I know that one of the big things that the report was also how that arts and cultural projects don't necessarily start out with a goal of peace building or conflict resolution, but that there are, through that journey, as you mentioned, and through working locally, working with symbolic skills, there are longer term outcomes that can come up that do respond to those outputs. So I'm going to go straight to Ricardo. From your experience and participation in the knowledge sharing workshop, what do you see as the added value for the EU of working with EUNIC members in the area of culture in fragile contexts?
Thank you, Rosanna, and good afternoon to everyone. Before answering the question, I wanted to, first of all, thank both EUNIC and the British Council for organizing this fantastic two-day retreat in Cyprus. It was extremely informative, and it was extremely useful to sit around the table with other colleagues from other EU delegations and EUNIC members in order to discuss these issues. So thank you to Gitte, thank you to Lina, thank you to Isabel, and obviously yourself, Rosanna, for pulling this off quite nicely. And the report also that you have circulated is a very, very, very good one, especially the recommendations that you carve out of our 2 days there. So I invite everyone who's on this call to have a look at the report. And I'm actually very flattered that there's so many people on this call, including from foreign ministries in European capitals. And I hope that it will be useful for your future work in culture. So I'm taking an approach which is more hands-on, because working in a delegation, obviously focusing only on one country, we've managed to share with colleagues in Cyprus quite a few of our experiences, which are not very broad, unfortunately, because as you may know, the delegation to Yemen was evacuated from the country, first went back to Brussels, and now it's been relocated in Amman in Jordan, but it's still not in Yemen because the conflict is still raging. It's in its 6th year of war. Much less visibility compared to other conflicts, such as Syria or Libya, but unfortunately just as deadly, if not more, and just as crucial as the others, in the sense that Yemen is basically placed geographically in one of the most important trade routes for the European Union. Now, when it comes to culture, I think we've highlighted during the seminar, and apologies if I'm not going directly to the answer to your question, Rosanna, but I think it's important for people on this call to realize how much culture is and should be a part of foreign policy, whether national foreign policy, and I know that some countries more than others, mine, for example, makes this as a pillar of its foreign policy. But this should be absorbed also at EU level. We are the most diverse continent, one of the most diverse continents in the world, and for sure we have a cultural heritage which collectively is looked at by many around the world with quite a bit of envy. And to be honest with you, Yemen is also a very good interlocutor for the European Union because of the cultural heritage, thousands of years of cultural heritage there, in a very strategic area, which is the Gulf and the Red Sea area. Now, working in conflict, obviously what we have learned is that it's extremely challenging. I'm glad that Gitte mentioned at the beginning of the presentation the fact that COVID-19 has basically created a level playing field for everyone. We've been working remotely in the Yemen delegation. Basically, it's our daily bread, Zoom, WebEx. I mean, you name the remote applications, we have used them all in these past years. And I still cannot sort out my background, by the way. But this has, I think, has helped a lot. And in the recommendations, this is highlighted in showing how you can actually do a lot of cultural work, even remotely. And the impression that we have had here in the delegation is that usually EUNIC members tend to shy away from conflict zones because there is maybe no presence on the ground, which is obviously problematic when it comes to organizing activities on the ground. But COVID-19 has shown that this is actually untrue. You can organize things remotely. You can involve, for example, and maybe this is not highlighted enough in the report, you can work with the diaspora of many of these countries in conflict, and we're doing so. They have brilliant ideas, they have very close ties with people who are still in the country, and this should be exploited, if we can use this nasty word, more. There are obviously some challenges in working remotely, and I would like to highlight one in particular, which is the need to adopt a conflict-sensitive approach with whatever activity you decide to bring about. It makes me also reflect on the fact that culture should be included when programming other activities. And I know that you mentioned the link between development cooperation and humanitarian actions in countries in conflict. Do not shy away from injecting culture in all of these initiatives, because culture, and this is very, at least it's highlighted in the section of the report related to Yemen, is indeed a very good tool to foster peace building. And I would also add reconciliation, not only peace building. So for those of you who are, or your member states are involved in mediation practices, or are financing, for example, track 2 implementing partner or organizations who do dialogues amongst different parts in conflict, do not underestimate the possibility of including cultural initiatives as a tool to actually get these dialogues going on the ground. You don't have to be there physically, personally, you just need to trust, and I think Gill was referring to the element of trust, which is very important, the partners who are doing that, in order then to bring forward these activities. And I know that several member states are looking into mediation as one of the tools of their interventions in these countries in conflict. So let me move on now to your question, Rosanna. Sorry for being a bit long-winded before. We think that there is great added value in having the EU working with EUNIC members. Why is that? First of all, the moment in which the European Union absorbs the concept of culture as being an element of its own foreign policy, it can actually draw onto the experience of the EU member states and the rich, heritage of each and every member state in order to, fly ideas with them, get input from EUNIC members on what has maybe worked in other countries. And then it's for the member states also to, again, I use very nasty terms, but for EU member states to use delegations, EU delegations on the ground, in order to further their activities in this sector. Now, in the case of Yemen, no member state is present in the country. The EU delegation is not present in the country, but we have been in this past year quite a staunch supporter of the possibility of organizing EUNIC remote clusters. And I really hope that COVID-19 actually does prove this. I won't bore you with the activities that we organize remotely through our development colleagues and their programs, or directly from the press and information sections in delegations, but there is a lot of scope for doing more in conflict countries. And the collaboration between EUNIC members and delegations can be imagined in a very creative way. We, for example, organize as delegation meetings with heads of mission, the classic HOMS meetings that you must have all heard about. We've been doing it remotely, not since COVID, but even before, in order to tie in all member states who follow Yemen from different parts of the world, because they're not all based here in Amman. Some are based in Riyadh, some are based in Cairo, some are based back in capital. So as HOMS managed to hold their meeting and run their activities in this kind of atomized way, there is no reason why EUNIC members cannot rally and get together to support, for example, Yemen. And I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ricardo. And I see you're already doing your job of raising awareness of the role of culture for foreign policy. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that, and also your experience of how to work remotely. And that ties us nicely into Olivier, who is with the French Corporation, now based in Paris. In what ways can you continue operating in Afghanistan? how would you encourage more cooperation between EUNIC members and with the EU in the context of Afghanistan?
Good morning or afternoon to everyone. Thank you for hosting this meeting, and thank you for organizing this amazing 2 days meeting in Nicosia. It was really great. I would like to focus on the practical things. I mean, what is it working in the fragile context countries, and especially today after the COVID-19 crisis, because it changed the paradigm, and now we have to rethink everything we have done by the past. And I will talk only about Afghanistan because this is my experience. So I have been working in Afghanistan before, from 2010 to 2014. So I know exactly what is the context. And today, since September, I'm working remotely from Paris, and I've done 2 missions in Afghanistan so far. And I will be based again in Kabul at the beginning of September. So for me, there is before the COVID-19 and the after COVID-19 crisis. Before, in Kabul, we were, as the French Institute in Afghanistan, the only institute present in Afghanistan. So we had the space, we had the people there, local people working for us, trained in France, so it was more or less the same as when we had some French expatriate working there, and we could organize activities, any kind of cultural activities, but with taking in consideration the security parameters, meaning that we can't host a large number of people because of the security, so it is limited. The maximum numbers we can have, it is 300, we could have, because it was before the COVID-19, but it was usually 60 or 90 people, and you have to think about what is it to move in Kabul. It's not easy because there is a lot of constraints, the traffic, the security, the taxi. So it was already with that environment, it was very difficult to organize activities with the right people. I mean, for the VIPs, it's not difficult to move and to come to the French Institute, but for the students, for the artists, coming to the French Institute, which is the center of Kabul, it's already very difficult. They put their security at stake when they do so. But we were organizing some activities. It was the most difficult for us. It was to open the French Institute to France, because this is what we do usually. But bringing people from France to Afghanistan, it was already a challenge. And we couldn't do that easily because of the security again. So sometimes their institution would not allow them to come to Afghanistan, or sometimes the situation in Afghanistan was not good enough to invite them, so on and so forth. And we didn't move yet to online activities because it was not in the spirit of the French Institute, and we were not used to that. So even in that context, connecting with other institutions, I mean, EU institution was already difficult. First of all, because most of them disappeared. Goethe shut down his facilities because of a big attack on 2017. British Council is doing online activities, but they are not anymore hosting events because they have been attacked in 2014. And there is no other cultural facilities unless they are Afghan, and even so, organizing things. So we were the only one. So now there is the COVID-19 crisis, and then it changed because we went totally blind. We were not ready to do online activities. And in the example, if we talk about Afghanistan is not ready also to do so, because if you consider the public we had before, those people, they don't have necessarily a good connection. They don't have a laptop. They have usually they have a smartphone, but when you don't have a Wi-Fi connection, or when you don't have whatever, it's not easy to get connected. So, for example, now we learn quickly how to use Zoom or any platform to organize meetings or activities. But organizing a Zoom meeting with Afghan contact persons we have in Afghanistan, it's already very difficult because they can't get connected. It's not that they don't want, but they really can't. So we have to work on it. And even for the French Institute, it's challenging because, you know, we have rules, regulation. So if you change your needs, you have to change your budget. Having a good connection in Afghanistan, it's very practical, but this is the reality. Having a good internet connection in Afghanistan, it costs a lot. For the French Institute, for example, it is 2,500 euros per month. At the very beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, my budget wouldn't allow it because it was not planned. It was not, so we have to change that. And then there is the people working there. They were not used to use Zoom. None of us were used, but in this context, it was very, very, very difficult. So my fear, and it is that in these countries, they are getting blind. They can't get connected. They need to be connected. They are in Afghanistan, for example. The lockdown in Kabul, especially, will continue until end of August. So it's already 3 months that they have been in lockdown, and they have 2 more months in front of them. So they are alone. They are lonely in their houses, and now they are getting sick because they attend some familial events. It's a very difficult situation for this kind of countries.
Yeah. Thank you, Olivier. And I think it's a bit of a reality check that is very much welcome on this call. There's not only pre-COVID-19 and the challenges faced with security, connectivity, mobility, but there's also the post-COVID where that is exaggerated, and additional health concerns as well. So thank you for sharing your reflections. I'm going to move to our last speaker, and then I will open up for some questions. So Stephanie, I'll come to you, as you were able to join the knowledge sharing workshop remotely back in November. What do you feel EUNIC members could learn from each other in order to work in a more meaningful and efficient way moving forward, but also up until now? What do you see the role of EUNIC and the EU playing to gather different actors together for a common cause?
Thanks, Rosanna. Yeah, unfortunately I wasn't able to join in person in Cyprus, but thanks. Yeah, I want to echo everyone's thanks for convening that meeting. For what I was able to join, it was a really useful conversation, and the report as well, I think, is very strong and gives a lot of very clear recommendations for how we can work in a more connected way as EUNIC members and EU delegations and beyond. I think maybe just pick up on something that Ricardo mentioned in his intervention about EUNIC members and how we've all kind of developed different operational models in all of these different contexts. As British Council Syria, we closed our Damascus operation at the end of 2012, and we had a period of a couple of years where we were still running some Syria programming, but it was very much tied into regional work. And in 2015, we then took a decision to actually re-establish a Syria team and a Syria operation based in Beirut. And I think other UNIC members and other institutions working on culture or working on the crisis response have taken different approaches to how they set up their operations. And that creates a complexity in terms of working together and collaborating. So I think that's a kind of challenge we have to deal with. But I mean, almost 10 years into the crisis in Syria, I think there's a recognition, I think, by all of us that the damage to the social fabric caused by the conflict is huge. And as cultural institutes, I think we all have kind of a shared sense of the priorities for cultural work in such a context. And also, you know, we're employing similar models, and also in many cases, actually, we're working with the same partners or very similar kinds of partners on a local level. I guess, yeah, like that shared sense of the role that arts can play and the role cultural programming can play in building trust and breaking isolation and really driving social change and development in a context like Syria is what pulls us together and makes, you know, brings value to this kind of discussion. And I think, again, echoing something Gill said, I think context is king, and the kind of creating those local level mechanisms for sharing and collaborating is really, really crucial. Even if it's difficult, I think we need to kind of make a renewed effort to do that. In terms of specific things, I think we can be sharing better between ourselves. I guess it would be good to know the focus areas of other institutions, specifically in the context we work in, and also the kind of expertise that individual institutions or partner organizations have to bring. And you know, we're all doing bits of research and mapping, and we have experience with working with different organizations, and that knowledge is not being pulled together and shared in an effective way. And I think that's a priority. And also, again, something that Gill mentioned, I think there are models in place. She talked about theories of change. I think we've as British Council, we've done a lot of work in trying to develop models that can be scalable when funding's available. And, you know, M&E is a big part of that, but also like how we work on capacity building with partners, I think is also something that is a kind of an approach that cuts through different areas of work, different themes, if we, you know, so that's something where it would be really, really good to share more. I mean, I think in terms of the role of the second part of your question, the role of UNIC in the EU, I guess as an individual institution, it's quite hard to lead kind of efforts at coordination or collaboration. And we see in the Syria context specifically, there is a very strong system of collaboration in the formal humanitarian kind of emergency response frameworks, but that's totally absent for cultural practitioners and people working in the cultural sector. And I think part of that as well is like there's also a kind of absence of policy or vision for cultural work and the development of the independent cultural sector, and how that can be part of social change and community cohesion and peace building efforts, which are part of the, you know, the formal response. So for me, what I would love to see is, you know, I think UNIC and the EU have a major role to play in that kind of policy and coordination level, and bringing together different institutes and organizations across the spectrum, and really in a very concrete locally led way, identifying the key areas where we think, you know, culture can be integrated into that larger framework of response, and, you know, just pushing that agenda of setting shared objectives and priorities, which should be, you know, hopefully a base for closer collaboration, and hopefully as well, you know, larger scale joint programming between institutes and local partners, rather than a little more, you know, some of the smaller stuff that's happening at the moment, because, you know, we're all working as individual organizations and drawing on the limited resources that we have at our disposal.
Great, thanks so much, Steph. And very good point about how we have so much expertise and knowledge and research, different operating models, partners we've worked with over the years, and it's just how to coordinate and collaborate on that. And I'm sure that the EU delegations, but also UNIC Global and EU institutions can support, whether it's with knowledge sharing workshops and research reports and programs, or through policy and ensuring collaboration with humanitarian aid and emergency response operations as well. So thanks very much to all of our speakers for sharing your thoughts. We will now come to the questions from other participants on the line. So we have about 20-25 minutes to go through some questions. I see there's a question from Imke Grimmer from Goethe Institute Beirut in the chat about working with diaspora. And I know that's something Ricardo mentioned, so I would invite him to perhaps answer that. So the question is, can some of the speakers share a bit more about experiences in working with diaspora, as this could be interesting in Lebanon?
Thank you for the question. I'm not sure I have a precise and exact answer, because as I was mentioning, most of these ideas and engagement that the EU delegation to Yemen has had in these past years have been rather creative and thinking out of the box. But what we have noticed is that many of the interlocutors of the delegation and also the UN, in terms of Office of the Special Envoy, etc., were not residing inside Yemen. Some were here in Jordan, many are in Saudi Arabia, in Beirut, all around the region, and there are some EU member states who also host Yemeni diaspora. So what we have noticed is that families in Yemen, possibly also because of the tribal nature of society in Yemen, are extremely close. And even if you are abroad, you always have very, very close links to your families who are still staying in Yemen. And one of the characteristics of these large families is that often they find themselves on different sides of the conflict. So you might have, you know, a cousin who's a Houthi fighter, and on the other side of the front line, you have, you know, the other cousin who is a doctor, for example. So leveraging on diaspora, on the ideas that the Yemeni diaspora who's closer to the delegation can actually feed into the thinking of the delegation, of the programs, for example, development projects that the delegation is putting together with some implementing partners who unfortunately tend to be always international implementing partners, and I'm specifically referring in the case of Yemen to UN agencies. You know, that's a 2, if not 3-step separation between the final beneficiary of the action that you're putting through, which is not ideal. So one of the methods that we have found to bridge this is to actually invest smaller amounts and progressively increase the amounts with which we work with directly with Yemenis. And you will be amazed of what you can actually do with small amounts of money. And this goes in the direction of what Stephanie was saying earlier in terms of lack of resources. One of the most successful Yemeni films, which is 10 Days Before the Wedding, which has been shown in Brussels, actually also we brought it as delegation to Brussels in one of the UN hosted events at the end of last year. It was made with $34,000. which is peanuts for many of the budgets that we have, especially headquarters managing on Yemen. And the impact of that film, they were showing it in Aden. They didn't have any open air cinemas. They just had, you know, a white wall where they projected the video. And they had to organize like different evenings for the kind of demand that there was for screening that movie. So this should just give you an idea of what can be done in countries in conflict and how starved they are for culture and support for the cultural section. So I mean, the short answer is I invite you to be very, you know, flexible and inventive, and just reach out to the diaspora of the country that you have in your own country that you're planning on targeting. Sit down, have coffee with them, and they will have thousands of ideas for you.
Thank you. So we have a couple of other questions, unless other speakers would like to speak to the point on diaspora.
Yeah, I can add something. I mean, it's a really interesting challenge, particularly in the Syrian context, because at the start of the crisis, I mean, so much of the cultural sector left Syria. So much of the cultural practitioners that we had a sort of long track record of working with left. And I think when we re-established our work as British Council Syria, we were quite insistent that our working culture is not purely in the country. It's for Syrian cultural practitioners wherever they may be. So actually, a lot of our early work was about reconnecting with that network of cultural leaders, a lot of them outside the country, and then working with them to find ways and spaces that actually we could re-engage in the country, which is obviously much more difficult than working in Beirut or in Berlin. So I think our approach has always been that there is one sector. It is very disparate and scattered, but it is still talking to they're still talking to each other, and we're now at the point where we're trying to find ways to run projects that actually work with both people in the diaspora and people based in the country at the same time, and that's more challenging. But I think you know, with cultural work, so much of the impact can also be realized by working with people outside the country too, if it's really not possible to work with those based in the country.
Great, thank you. We have another question in the chat about working with UNESCO, but also, Ricardo, you mentioned working with UN bodies, and I think Olivier, given the fact that a lot of member states aren't physically present in Afghanistan, what the role of UN bodies can be, and how we could, as EUNIC members and EU practitioners, work more closely with them as well as local partners. So would any of the speakers like to speak to that point?
Just maybe on my side, I would suggest to take this very valid question and discuss it at headquarters level. So I think it's better addressed not for specific countries. You can bring, you know, in your discussions, the examples of Yemen. We have a program with UNESCO, which is quite successful, and we're looking at working even more with them actually in the future. But I think it's a question which is best addressed at HQ level.
Yes, and it's one of the recommendations in the report as well, which we can push forward. Olivier, you had your hand raised.
Yes, I agree with Ricardo. Being based in Paris, it's easy for me to work with some headquarters like UNESCO, because UNESCO is in Paris. So I work more easily with UNESCO in Paris than with UNESCO in Afghanistan, because it's a small team. There are only 2 or 3 people, and they are in lockdown most of the time, either for security and today for COVID-19. So I can see my colleagues in UNESCO every day, and I barely talk to my colleagues, UNESCO colleagues in Kabul for those reasons. But yes, it's better to talk with the headquarters.
Great. Thank you. We have Laura Hartz on the line from the Goethe Institute Jordan, and she'd like to add something on this idea of remote UNIC clusters for Yemen. So would you like to unmute and share your thoughts?
Sure, thank you. I would like to add what Ricardo said, and I mean, we have been in contact already about, and this idea came up about establishing a remote UNIC cluster for Yemen. And besides what Stephanie said, that there is maybe also a lack of a common vision of what we can do together, or a vision, yeah, of collaboration in these kind of contexts. And it goes also in line with what my colleague Konrad from Beirut also added in the chat, that there's such structural differences in our organization that actually the main obstacle in creating this remote cluster was finding the right contact person and the people responsible in the different member organizations. So Ricardo and I, we've been trying for about 3/4 of a year now to find other people that would like to join this initiative, and it's just not impossible. It's not possible because there just isn't anybody responsible for culture for Yemen, because member states don't work on the ground. So besides the vision and the lack of collaboration, it really goes down to the basic level of that we don't even know who to talk to. So if from this call anybody feels responsible, please contact Ricardo or me. And because it's really something that we want to work on. And I mean, doing it from Jordan, where the EU delegation is for Germany, also the German embassy for Yemen is here. And as Goethe Institute, I have taken over also the mandate for working in Yemen from here. So it would make sense to start doing it here, but it really doesn't, since we're using Zoom and everything more frequently now. Anyways, it doesn't matter where the responsible persons are. So please contact us.
Great, yeah, I'm very pleased that we're using this platform to also connect people, because Ruwaida, our colleague from British Council Yemen, has written in the chat and would like to connect with you. We do actually operate inside Yemen, and I think it's a way to talk about this remote cluster and get that idea moving forward. So I'm very pleased to be able to connect you. Lena, are there any other questions coming through that you would like to ask?
Well, we still had a bit more on UNESCO, and we do actually have participants from UNESCO here in the chat. So I was wondering whether Oriola or Guy would like to maybe also say what they are getting out from this, because I've seen in the chat that UNESCO is working.
Hello. Hello, Lina. It's Oriol. I don't have the camera because I have a problem with my Wi-Fi, but it's really interesting, this discussion, and I will not. We've been in contact here in Brussels several times, and we know that is something that is on the floor. The cooperation with UNESCO, but in different cases, the difficulties that they are working in these conflict situations, and I just refer to the speakers that from Olivier and Ricardo. Is something that it has to be built also at level of headquarters in Paris, in terms to build a strong position and a strong cooperation between knowing that the framework, the standard setting frameworks that UNESCO works, and the framework also that UNESCO works with the European Union is in this partnership, and also the strong component of the conventions that we have all the member states under this framework. So I think that is something that we need to put on the table and to see how we can collaborate in a more effective way, in a more concrete way. We are doing, as you know, and as Gita know, we are trying to put all the efforts and to see how in all the different projects, ongoing projects that we are having in the framework of the European Union's partnership, how to work better, how to strengthen our cooperation with EUNIC, with EUNIC clusters in the field, on the ground. So this is something that is, as I said, is a work in progress. And as you mentioned in the report, it's really important to continue this work. I think that we will have during this year, it's a key year, I think, for several issues concerning Brussels specifically, and notably during these negotiations on the multi-annual framework, financial framework, that and also the position of the EU in the and culture in the foreign policy strategy, and how the protection of cultural heritage and the role of the European Union could be really important for this. So there is a lot of things. Just also to highlight something related to the 50th anniversary of the 70 Convention, the one who's in charge of to fight the illicit trafficking of cultural goods. That is also important because it will be important this year, and notably during the Council of the EU Presidency of from Germany that starts next week. And there will be this conference in Berlin with it seems that it will be virtual conference, online conference on this subject, and also this could be also a good opportunity to see how to strengthen the cooperation with all the stakeholders.
Thank you, Leo.
Thanks.
We still have time for one or two more questions if anyone would like to ask. There's quite a lot of chat about the case of Syria, and I think Rasha and Conrad have exchanged on how to work between institutes for that common context. I don't know whether, Conrad, you'd like to come in? And we have Jim Buttery, who is also happy to ask a question. So, Jim, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Rosanna. Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Buttery from British Council, and I'm about to go to Baghdad to take over our operation there. Very interesting report, and I was very pleased to hear the long-term perspective being advocated, and also the role of local context. What wasn't coming across particularly clearly to me in the report regarding challenges, they seem quite process-oriented, and I just wonder if in the course of what sounded like a great workshop in Nicosia, whether you came up with the issue of trust is mentioned a lot in the report, but around the challenges of that, I wonder if you can say anything about the issues around power relations or availability of resources, or where there has been good practice identified up until now in the use of arts and culture to get people together who have very different worldviews in these fragile operating environments. I wonder if that came across as a challenge. It's not clear to me in the report if it did.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, so we did mainly focus in the knowledge sharing workshop on sort of structures, operations, and also strategies of our organizations, as well as practice and examples that we shared. I think it would be very beneficial to go into the practice more and into the content of what kinds of projects are there, whether it's good or bad practice, what have we learnt, and what are those challenges, what are ways that we could learn from each other and collaborate. And to address the issue of trust and also power relations, one of the things that kept coming back was the importance of working with local actors, really understanding that local context and knowing what those cultural actors also want to do. So as I mentioned in response to Gill's intervention, and Steph from Syria knows this very well from Create Syria, the program there, that started as an arts and peace building project of how can we bring peace builders and artists together to work jointly in order to address the issue of the network of artists from Syria being so dispersed, and how could they work together towards being sort of advocates for peace building back in their country. We quickly learned that that was not actually what the Syrian local cultural actors wanted to be doing. They wanted to just reconnect with each other and learn how to live in their new environments and connect with other artists across Europe and build their artistic practice and continue to be able to be artists and not refugees or not considered in that way. So the program then has changed and shifted and is much more about just supporting the cultural sector, supporting those actors, building networks and capacity building and artistic activity and connection with other countries and with the diaspora. So that's one example, and I think there's so many and so much knowledge in the network of EUNIC members that could be the next stage of this knowledge sharing workshop would be to pull together more examples and to demonstrate the power that arts and culture can have for trust and trust building and social cohesion. Lina, are there any further questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, we have another question from the Embassy of India in Copenhagen. I don't know the person's name, but he was talking about state actors and non-state actors, and do we have any successful maybe experiences where we included the governments of those fragile environments, as you say. We spoke at the beginning of the chat, and I think Gail mentioned it, that when you can, you should. It's not one approach for all, but maybe one of the speakers or one of the practitioners could say a good example of how they managed to work with state actors. Yeah, Olivier?
In Afghanistan, we have a good experience with the AKTC, Aga Khan Trust for Culture. So I don't know if you consider it as a governmental or non-governmental, but it's an organization we like to work with because they are very straightforward, and they have good projects, and most of the time it matches with our policies and strategies. And I think that they work the same with other organizations like British Council as well, and Goethe Institute when they were there. So this is a good example of a non-state actor that could be locally active. I don't know if they are in Yemen, but they are very present in Afghanistan.
Ricardo, you wanted to say something on this as well?
Yes, sorry, I was finding the unmute button. It's related to what I was saying earlier of engaging with track 2 implementing partners. i.e. to use organizations such as, the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, Search for Common Ground. There are several of these tracked organizations. I'm not sure who is active in India, but it would be good to maybe, have an entry point via tracked organizations in order to engage with non-state actors. I think that's the question.
Okay, I think we're coming towards the end, so thank you a lot. Conrad, you still had a question, and I think you fixed your microphone. So, do you want to
yes, actually, the question. I hope it's working now. Thanks, first of all, to everybody who was sharing. I wanted to pick up on what Steph has said. She called it the complexity of the different setup of organizations. Let's say EUNIC members in relation to countries, for example, like Syria or Yemen. And that this is a huge obstacle to working together effectively. I was wondering if the workshop in Cyprus has developed ideas how not to just identify this complexity, but also how to overcome it or how to work constructively with it. I mean, I was thinking one way would be to even know how our British Council, Institut Français, Goethe Institute, positioning themselves in relation to, for example, Syria or Yemen, because even this is not transparent, and this could be a first step to know what was driving these strategic decisions, how are they solving, certain questions of how to be represented or not represented. And I was wondering if the workshop was developing any ideas, or if it was more like taking count of the complexity. That was my question.
I think quickly to just say that we did bring that to also the leadership of EUNIC and your heads, or to see that this kind of a coordination is needed. And I think we will. One of the recommendations is to pilot this approach and try to coordinate and figure out how members are approaching those countries. So that's definitely on the to-do list.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. We have the last question from Rasha, and then we'll be wrapping up for today. Rasha.
And in fact, it wasn't a question. It was just back to the question related to India, so to someone from India. I was just going to say that sometimes engaging with government, it's not that easy in fragile context and in conflict states. And that is basically, sometimes it has a political angle. Like, for example, for the case of Syria, due to the sanctions, a lot of European organizations cannot work directly with the Ministry of Culture, for example, including us. We do not engage with the government. And that is something to consider. I know that case might not be the same for Yemen or for other conflict states, but for Syria, because it's a sanctioned country and it's being very, very strict. So this element is not available. But also back to what Jim was saying on the power relations and the trust. And someone already mentioned how we need to work more with the locals, but we also need to be to make sure we have inclusive selection and look at the country. I mean, working with local organizations is always good, but we need to have a process in place to do like the proper due diligence, to triangulate the data, to make sure that we are really speaking to everyone, because operating remotely is very challenging. And it's very challenging also to find usually the most inclusive approaches. So I think that could form a very good topic for later workshops, and we would be more than happy to share the Syria experience. And last point on peace process, this is very important point, and connecting to track 2 and bringing track 3 to voices to track 2. As a British Council, we're lucky because we have another program under our Inclusive Communities portfolio that work on Syria peace process and bringing track 3 to track 2. And we always try to integrate the cultural aspect into this, and voices of artists and cultural actors. But that's very, very very important, and I think thanks a lot for this platform. It's good to share, and we'll be happy to share more. Thanks.
Thank you, Rasha.
One further thing.
Yes, Gail, please.
Yeah, so some of the comments that have been coming back about examples and how you relate to government and things as well, I just perhaps wanted to just touch on an example from Colombia, where we have, so some of the way you can do it is to have a PhD student. So we have a range of PhD students in different countries that work on a longitudinal project. And so Grace, who worked on part of the report that I posted up with us, she's based in Colombia. But the key thing to remember for some of you is that you're there and you're working at times, we're putting forward possible solutions, but you're working in chaos at a time of conflict. And even when you think you're in post-conflict, so for example, with Grace's work, she thinks she was working in a post-conflict environment in Colombia when it's now looking like that is not the case, and the peace agreement is being revisited. And so she also has a job as well as her PhD now with, I'm not quite sure how you say it, but I think it's Batua. It's a non-profit organisation and foundation that looks at working with the social fabric and spaces for reconciliation and coexistence for the benefit of children. And she has worked with them. She's working with that as a coordinator of that, and they have 40,000 young people annually across the region where they're using music to work with children to look, but specifically to look at social inclusion, rights and cultural diversity, and to look at the human rights of children with a right to culture. So again, in this situation where cultural projects are used, and she has a book project, for example, where people donate projects as well, donate books, and they share in that. And it can lead to mutual understanding and resilience building and avoiding conflict. So some of the stuff she is to give them skills to not get themselves involved in a situation and to be able to walk away from conflict or not to agree to become part of certain groups and to leave that situation. So the difficulty though I have another student, Yara, who works and we've done work in Syria and published some work out on that I can share as well. So again, you have to remember they're existing in chaos, and whilst the Ministry of Culture in Colombia are supportive, within a day that can change, and the projects that were once funded are no longer funded. So that's where the role of places like the EU institutions and EUNIC and others become almost more important, because you can maintain networks with people on the ground, even if that is virtual in some places. Anyway, I hope that added a little bit to that discussion.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I will now pass over to Gita to wrap up and share some next steps with us. Thank you so much for taking part in this discussion.
Thank you, Rosanna. Thanks to all the speakers and participants who've been in the room and actively shared some of their experiences and questions. So we launched this report, Working in Fragile Contexts, how to move forward, or what are our major takeaways also from this session. Number one, I think this is something that Ricardo mentioned, make culture count in foreign policy. This is one of the major objectives of EUNIC, and I would like to use this opportunity to draw your attention to a statement that we've published as EUNIC, as the 36 members of EUNIC, that is called Make Cultural Relations Count towards Make Cultural Relations Count in a post-crisis global society. And it wraps up very neatly why we believe that cultural relations or international cultural relations play an important role and should become one of the main pillars of the EU foreign policy. Member states are already doing a lot, as we've heard, and now we need a coordinated approach together with the EU. So this is a statement that I invite you to read. Lina has dropped the link into the chat box. It can be a very useful tool, I think, also for your advocacy with stakeholders, also sometimes with the EU delegation, because we have someone like Ricardo who already actively lobbies within the EU institutions, and we need to do that more and convince more colleagues. Also, we do this here in Brussels. Then I think some of the issues that were raised again also here is the complexity of our structures. EUNIC is already a very diverse network, and I think this is augmented in a way by working in fragile contexts that we've discussed today. But what I do take from this meeting is an official sort of mandate as a next step for us to put together working groups on Syria and on Yemen. This might become a remote cluster. It might just remain a remote working group. Whatever works for the context, I think, is what we should strive for. And I wonder, and this is something you can put in the comments, if there is a similar interest for Libya, because that we can also push. I see that we have a colleague from the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the room. I know that Italy is also quite active in Libya, so we can take this forward as well, possibly. Then something that Gill mentioned in her intervention, the importance of local context and empowerment of local organizations. This is also one of the key parameters of UNIC's work. And it's good to be reminded that this is also the case, and maybe especially the case, as we sometimes cannot work with governments or authorities in these contexts. So this is something that should always be on our mind. Then one thing that I've heard several colleagues mention is this need for a toolkit, or as a next step, maybe a typology of projects that have worked, where we can sort of prove or underline the efficiency or the impact that cultural relations projects or cultural relations approaches can have, not only a fragile context. I think for our work, we need this on in a more general, with a more general perspective, but I think we could take forward such a typology as an outcome of this report. But I mean, this report is also, it's for us now a tool to say to our colleagues, look, there is interest in working in Syria, for instance, or in Yemen. And if you're not sure who to contact, for instance, who's responsible for Yemen, at the UNIC Global Office, we are in touch with all the heads of our members. And I think now we have an official mandate to put action into words. It is also complex in our members' cases, as we've also heard from colleagues from Institut Français. But I think we should take this forward. And before we finally wrap up, I do have a poll for you. And this is about how you would like to take this report forward, how you will share it with your colleagues and with your stakeholders. These are some of the ideas of what could be possible. You can pick as many as you like. How to take this report forward, you can share it with colleagues by email, you can share it on social media. You can make it a topic in meetings. You can make meetings specifically to introduce this report with policymakers. You can bring it to your UNIC cluster meeting. And if you don't have a cluster, UNIC is where UNIC members are, so you can bring it to the attention of other UNIC members in your country. We also have an evaluation link, which Robert will share with you. We are constantly testing working remotely in webinars, and it would help us a lot to hear your feedback. So please help us to make these, to improve our webinars. And there was another comment here. Yes, there are German colleagues in the room, not from the Foreign Office, from the Goethe Institute. How to link this back to the German presidency? Good. I would like, before I share the results of our poll, 19 colleagues have voted so far. I would like to thank again the British Council and UNIC Global colleagues for organizing this, first of all, the workshop, then the report, and now the webinar. And special thanks also go out to the Cyprus Ministry of Education and Culture, because they have also organized the workshop together with us, and they have hosted us and organized very nice excursions for us to discover Cyprus. And now that is that. Let's look at these results. Okay, we have a winner. 17 out of 22 colleagues who voted will share this report by email. We will put an article on our website, unicglobal.eu, which is completely relaunched. And we also, might be interesting for colleagues in clusters, have a resource center where you can find the most important documents you need for your work with EUNIC. But we also have a news section, so we will share a short article there as well, which will have the report linked to it. That's it from our side. Again, thank you very much. And see you again in one of our next webinars. We have one coming up on arts and disability, and others will make the program for July very shortly. So stay tuned, sign up for our newsletter, then you are directly informed whenever we have something going on or we launch the cluster fund. So again, thank you very much and have a nice rest of the day.